The HOA drained my private lake, claiming it was a flood risk. So I used nothing but landscaping, elevation, and a little creativity to turn their $5 million dream homes into swamps. And the best part? It was 100% legal. I went to every single HOA board meeting after they drained my lake. I showed up early, sat in the front row, and calmly laid out every piece of evidence I had. Environmental impact reports, flood prevention surveys, hydrology studies, even letters from local environmental agencies confirming that my lake wasn't just safe, but actually helpful for the neighborhood's drainage system. But it didn't matter. I could have brought in NASA water engineers, and they still wouldn't have cared. Because truthfully, their decision had nothing to do with safety or science. It had everything to do with power and property values. Behind those closed-door meetings, certain board members, let's just say the wealthiest and loudest ones, had been whispering about how my little lake didn't match the aesthetics of their manicured lawns and designer patios. They saw my piece of land not as a peaceful retreat or a responsible water feature, but as an eyesore. They thought it might scare off potential buyers or lower their own home values by a few digits. They even bragged during one meeting that getting rid of it would make the community safer. And get this, restore visual harmony. Visual harmony? Give me a break. My lake wasn't some mosquito-ridden puddle. It was a properly engineered, fully permitted pond with a maintained ecosystem. Honestly, it looked better than half the water features on their golf courses. But they couldn't control it. It wasn't theirs, so it had to go. Once it was gone, my yard was unrecognizable. Where there once was a shimmering lake with gentle ripples and sunshine dancing across its surface, now there was just a pit. An ugly, scarred, muddy crater. The kind of thing you'd see after a sinkhole or some natural disaster. The gentle swans that used to nest nearby were gone. The frogs that sang at dusk had vanished. Even the breeze felt emptier, like the place itself had been silenced. It wasn't just heartbreaking. It was insulting. I had spent years and thousands of dollars, legally by the way, building that lake, landscaping it, nurturing the wildlife. And just like that, a group of privileged, power-hungry homeowners took it all away. Because it didn't fit their vision of uniform luxury. First, I wanted to go to war. File lawsuits. Contact the local news. Rally neighbors. But soon I realized that wouldn't get me what I really wanted. I didn't want some hollow apology after months in court. I didn't want to win a petty blame game. No. I wanted poetic revenge. The kind of revenge where nature takes center stage. The kind where you don't have to scream to make a point. You just sit back and let gravity do the heavy lifting. That's when the idea came to me. Clear as day, like water flowing through a stream. I didn't need a lake to make a difference. I just needed water. A lot of it. At the right time. In the right places. You see, what the HOA forgot in their arrogant quest to destroy what I'd built was one very crucial geographical fact. My property sits just slightly higher than most of theirs. Not a mountain. Not a cliff. But enough of an incline that, if rainfall is managed a certain way, if it's redirected, funneled, restrained just enough to build momentum, well, let's just say nature starts reclaiming its rightful path. So I got to work. Not with lawsuits or protests. With shovels. Drainage layouts. Gutters. Strategic landscaping. On paper, all of it completely legal. After all, a homeowner has every right to design their landscape for water efficiency. That's exactly what I was doing. But I wasn't just thinking about what happened to my yard. I was thinking about what could happen to theirs. I started by redesigning the natural water flow of my property. I removed the old gravel swale that used to direct water away from the neighborhood. Totally within my rights now that there was no lake to worry about. I regraded my lawn in subtle ways so that rain didn't sink in. It moved. Then I added underground piping. A new irrigation system that discreetly channeled stormwater. During dry days, nothing looked unusual. But the moment we got a heavy rain, that water was headed downhill. Toward the very people who thought draining my lake would solve their problems. It wouldn't happen overnight. The effect would be gradual. But that was the brilliance of it. They wanted me to be powerless. Instead, I turned my property into a quiet, legal, and very clever form of resistance. Because sometimes you don't need to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you fight nonsense with science. And water always follows the path of least resistance and karma. See, while my lake was being unfairly emptied, something very interesting came to light, something the HOA never anticipated, and probably never had the foresight to consider. Elevation. My property, as it turns out, sits just slightly higher than the properties that surround it. It's not a hilltop mansion or anything, just a gentle slope. Subtle, barely noticeable unless you're really paying attention. But in the world of water flow, even a few feet of elevation can make a world of difference. And guess what water doesn't do? It doesn't stay still. Water always moves. And it always flows downhill. That's all I needed to know. And that's when the shift began. Not an emotional one, but a strategic one. I realized something vital. I didn't have to break any rules. I didn't have to file any lawsuits or engage in a scorched earth argument with the board. All I had to do was redirect nature. So I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. Step 1 was reimagining the landscaping of my yard. I brought in a landscape architect and an irrigation specialist, both of whom followed local laws, permits, and environmental guidelines strictly. Everything I did was above board. There would be no backroom trickery here. Just smart adjustments. First, I replaced my old grass with permeable pavers. Those earth-friendly tiles that let rainwater pass through instead of soaking in or running straight off. But I didn't stop at just laying them down. I had them arranged in a pattern that would naturally guide water to a few very specific zones on my property's edge, the exact areas where my land sloped down toward certain neighboring homes. The next move? A brand new irrigation system. Not just sprinklers or drip lines. I'm talking about an underground network of tubing designed to collect stormwater runoff and carry it discreetly beneath the surface. On paper, it's a water conservation system. In practice, it's a masterpiece of redirection. Now, here's the part that truly made the difference. The subsurface tubing didn't drain the water away from the neighborhood, the way the old drainage swale had. No. That retired swale used to collect runoff and transport it far to the other end of the community, keeping everyone nice and dry. But since my lake had been drained, that swale was no longer serving any purpose. The HOA saw to that when they destroyed the system, and they never once considered what would take its place. Legally, I was no longer responsible for maintaining the swale. It was installed initially to protect my lake, the one they tore apart. Without that lake to feed or protect, I had no legal obligation to keep the water flowing into distant areas. So I let the swale go to nature. I stopped mowing the path. I let soil and debris naturally accumulate. And eventually, after a few rains and windstorms, it simply filled up. That left water with one option: flow downhill into the properties directly below it. I told no one. There was nothing illegal happening, so I had nothing to hide. Everything was working as nature intended, just guided by a little human ingenuity. And then, I waited. The first few rains just softened the ground. No big deal. It looked like a typical seasonal shift. But the real magic happened during the first major storm of the season. One of those downpours that lasted over a day and saturated everything. That's when the reshaped terrain and redirected tubing showed their true strength. Water came down fast on my property, but it didn't stay. It flowed precisely where it was designed to flow. And since the old swale no longer moved water out and away, and since my pavers and channels guided water toward the fences of the million-dollar homes behind me, that's exactly where all the runoff went. Once water reaches a property below yours, and their drainage isn't prepared to handle the volume, pools, slowly at first, then in heavy patches, then suddenly standing water. Backyards that used to look like pages out of a luxury real estate magazine now looked like soggy, marshy messes. Charming flagstone pathways were underwater. Designer-imported plants wilted. Footpaths turned to muck. And this was just the beginning. I had engineered something brilliant using nothing but gravity, water, and my legal right as a homeowner to manage my land. No revenge was screamed. No threats were made. I simply handed the problem back to the people who created it. And nature? It did the rest. It started with just one heavy rainstorm. Just one. That first real storm of the season. The kind that rolls in slower than you'd expect, drumming soft at first, then pounding the rooftops with steady, relentless rhythm. Water gushed from the sky, pooling in gutters, racing down driveways, and flowing exactly where I had intended it to go. Toward them. Suddenly, those pristine mansions behind my property, the same homes owned by the loudest, most arrogant voices on the HOA board, found themselves under attack. Not by me, of course. No vandalism, no sabotage, no signs saying payback. Just a whole lot of water soaking everything they held dear. Their backyard paradise? Flooded. Luxury landscaping packages with imported Italian hedges and hand-laid slate walkways? Now puddles and floating debris. Fancy outdoor furniture sets? Submerged in several inches of runoff. And the basements? Let's just say that moisture found its way into more than one wall. Mildew doesn't care if your mortgage payment looks like a 6-digit zip code. Meanwhile, there I was. Relaxed. Calm. Fresh glass of lemonade in hand on my back porch, watching the storm play out like a quiet little symphony. And smiling. Not because I'm cruel, but because irony has a beautiful way of bringing things full circle. They took away my peaceful, carefully maintained lake, claimed it was a hazard, a risk, an unwelcome element in their perfect little community. But all my lake ever did was hold water, filter runoff, and protect their properties just as much as mine. It was a buffer, a barrier, a carefully designed stamp of natural elegance. And when they drained it, they drained the one thing protecting their multimillion-dollar landscaping investments from turning into miniature swamps. So that's what I gave them in return, marshland. Now let me be clear, the flooding didn't happen all at once. I wasn't looking to cause an outright disaster or call down suspicion. No, that would be reckless. And too obvious. I'm much more patient than that. Like I said before, I didn't break a single law. Every adjustment I made to my land was documented, permitted, and legal. The key lies in subtlety. Strategic grading, redirecting drainage, letting gravity and nature handle the rest. After the first rain, small puddles appeared on their side. Nothing concerning. After the second storm, the ground in their yards didn't dry as quickly. The grass yellowed and low spots turned mushy. Then came that third torrential rain, and suddenly half of their garden displays looked more like rice paddies than front lawns. Their golf course perfect grass? Soaked and ruined. And all while my property remained perfectly dry. Elevated. Untouched. Eventually they started to talk. At board meetings, whispered at first behind closed doors. Then openly. You could see them arriving early, huddled in worried conversations that always stopped when I walked in. I'd simply nod and smile, clipboard in hand, ready for another dull agenda full of nonsense rules and power-hungry posturing. Did they suspect me? Oh, without a doubt. But could they prove anything? Not a chance. There were no illegal structures, no documented acts of revenge. Nothing to sue over. Nothing that technically violated any HOA rule. In fact, when inspectors eventually came out, I was complimented on the environmentally friendly water features, the upgraded rain capture system, and the clear paths for excess runoff. All by the book. No hidden pumps. No barriers. No trespassing. Simply a meticulously designed setup that allowed nature to follow its natural course. Only slightly nudged by updated landscaping plans. That was the beauty of it. I didn't have to cause destruction. They did that to themselves. All I did was stop protecting them. I stopped doing extra for the neighborhood that betrayed me. I followed the rules, but I no longer went above and beyond to help them. When the swale filled in, when the buffer zone disappeared, the delicate balance of water management broke down. Simple as that. And the earth doesn't care about your home's Zillow estimate. Over a few months, the situation became impossible for them to ignore. Contractors were called. Drainage specialists wandered around their properties, scratching their heads. The HOA filed for neighborhood-wide emergency landscaping funds to mitigate water pooling and restore aesthetics. Meanwhile, I threw a backyard barbecue. Invited neighbors. People came up to me and said, "Wow, your yard looks amazing. Didn't that used to have a lake?" And I just smiled and said, "Yeah, too bad. Sure helped with the rain though." Poetic, isn't it? The very thing they feared became their reality, and the thing they destroyed would have been their salvation. Turns out flooding was a risk in the neighborhood. Once they made it that way, the HOA went into full panic mode. Suddenly, the very people who claimed my lake was a flood risk were holding emergency meetings, not because they had second thoughts, but because the lower properties, especially the loudest board members, were now turning into bogs in every storm. It was almost comedic watching them scramble. Meeting after meeting, they brought in engineers, hydrologists, and landscaping experts. They took soil samples like they were digging for treasure, set up temporary trenches and tested runoff patterns with colored water. But no matter what measures they tried, they couldn't stop the flooding. Because they weren't solving the actual problem. They were just scrambling to cover up the one they created. After weeks of research, testing, and growing frustration, one of the board members, a guy who once smugly called my lake an unsightly puddle during a meeting, approached me. Not with an apology, of course. That would have required admitting fault. Instead, he tried bargaining. He offered to pay me, out of his own pocket no less, to remodel or adjust my new landscaping. Mind you, these are the same people who accused me of being a threat to the neighborhood for putting in a lake that was legally sound and environmentally beneficial. Now he wanted to pay me to undo what they begged the court to let them destroy. I declined. Politely. But firmly. I told him that everything I'd done on my property was 100% legal. And I reminded him that unlike them, I had followed every regulation, every code, every environmental standard. If water was no longer flowing out of the neighborhood the way it used to, maybe, just maybe, they should look at who removed the natural buffer designed to handle that flow. That buffer, of course, had been my lake. When it became clear that their personal charm and thinly veiled threats weren't working, the HOA tried a different angle: legal action. They formally attempted to sue me under the claim that I was intentionally damaging neighboring properties through alteration of natural water flow. But here's the thing. When you do everything above board, you're protected. I had paperwork, permits, engineering plans, landscaping contracts, inspections. Everything down to the tilt of my stepping stones was documented. And guess what the inspection report said? My property was fully compliant. There was no illegal water diversion, no intentional obstruction, no tampering with their land. I hadn't built dams, rerouted storm drains, or pumped water onto their properties. I had simply modified my own property's terrain legally, and nature had taken its course. Turns out, when you drain a lake that used to hold tens of thousands of gallons of stormwater, the water doesn't just vanish. Goes somewhere. The HOA had not only eliminated their buffer, they also ignored warnings and engineered their own disaster. The case didn't even make it to trial. It was dropped faster than wet cement. While they wasted time and money on inspections, legal threats, and emergency landscaping consultations, I made better use of mine. I installed a brand new water feature, smaller than the original lake, but deeper and still fully permitted. It also included new vegetation, shallow wetland space, and even a few large decorative stones that attracted birds. It looked natural, peaceful, and most importantly, it worked like a charm. Within weeks of its completion, wildlife came back. Frogs returned and croaked their little songs again at dusk. I saw birds I hadn't seen in months, warblers, herons, even a pair of ducks that showed up like they remembered the old lake and were happy to see it back. Everything started to feel right again on my land. As for the rest of the community, not so much. The HOA ended up spending thousands, maybe tens of thousands, trying to reverse the damage from their own short-sighted decision. They commissioned underground pipelines, installed French drains, retrofitted sump pumps in several basements, and even hired a full-time drainage contractor for seasonal monitoring. And the best part? The original board couldn't escape the consequences either. One by one, the members most responsible for the anti-lake fiasco began resigning. Officially, some left due to family obligations or personal reasons, but anyone paying attention knew better. They left out of embarrassment, out of pressure, out of failure. The damage to their reputations and properties had been done. Eventually, a new board took over. Younger residents, a bit more open-minded and humble than their predecessors. More reasonable. More curious than judgmental. They weren't looking to dominate the neighborhood. They just wanted peace. A few of them dropped by one day to talk, not in suits and angry expressions but casually, with coffees in hand and genuinely open attitudes. They'd heard about what happened, and one even admitted the original board had gone too far with me. They offered to help me beautify the yard again. Maybe rebuild a newer, nicer lake like before. I looked out over my backyard, the pond glistening, frogs singing, flowers blooming, and smiled. I like it swampy, I said, because I didn't just rebuild a yard. I let nature speak for me. And it said everything that needed to be said. If you enjoyed this story of sweet, satisfying karma, Don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more real-life revenge stories, backyard brilliance, and HOA horror tales.